Avery Blackwell, 28, never expected her parents' request for a family dinner to end with an eviction notice. Shocked and hurt, she stared at her father's reddening face across the dining table as he delivered the ultimatum: surrender her childhood bedroom to her pregnant sister or find somewhere else to live. 3 months later, Avery stood on the front lawn of her new $1.2 million home directly across from her parents' house. Hey everyone! Before I dive deeper into how I ended up buying a luxury home just to spite my family, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you team family comes first or team respect goes both ways? Hit that like button if you ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted. And subscribe to join our community of real-life drama and sweet, sweet karma stories. Now, let's get back to the night that changed everything. Growing up in the Blackwell family meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, had always made it clear that family was everything. Their definition of family, that is. My older sister, Melissa, was their golden child. Straight-A student, married her high school sweetheart Tyler at 23, and pursued the career my father had envisioned for her in corporate law. I, on the other hand, was the family's designated disappointment. I chose art school over business college, remained stubbornly single into my late 20s, and built my career in digital marketing, a field my father dismissed as playing on computers all day. Despite our differences, I maintained a relationship with my family, even moving back into my childhood home after graduating, when my startup salary couldn't cover Boston's astronomical rent. The arrangement worked for everyone. I paid $800 monthly in rent, not insignificant for a bedroom with a shared bathroom, plus contributed to utilities and frequently bought groceries. My parents got extra income for their retirement fund, and I saved toward eventually buying my own place while navigating the brutal housing market. We maintained an uneasy peace for nearly 5 years, with weekly family dinners being the non-negotiable family ritual. That particular Thursday night felt different from the moment I walked through the door. The air was charged with anticipation, and Mom had prepared her special pot roast, a dish reserved for celebrations or what she called important discussions. Melissa and Tyler were already seated at the table, holding hands and exchanging meaningful glances. "There's my independent daughter," Dad said as I entered his tone, carrying that familiar edge of disapproval. Just in time for the big news. Mom fussed over my place setting while Melissa practically vibrated with excitement. "We've been waiting for everyone before sharing," she said, squeezing Tyler's hand so hard his knuckles whitened. After pouring wine for everyone except Melissa, my first clue, Dad raised his glass. "To family and new beginnings." Melissa could no longer contain herself. "We're pregnant," she burst out. Due in January, the table erupted in cheers and congratulations. I genuinely felt happy for my sister despite our complicated relationship. "That's amazing news," I said, leaning over to hug her. "I'm going to be the coolest aunt ever." Actually, my father interrupted, his expression suddenly serious. "That's something we need to discuss." My mother nodded, reaching for my hand across the table. "Sweetheart, your sister and Tyler have decided they want to move back home temporarily after the baby comes. With housing costs and childcare being what they are, it makes sense for them to save money during the first year. Plus," Melissa added, "having Grandma and Grandpa right here will be such a blessing." I nodded, still not understanding what this had to do with me. "That's great. I'm sure it'll be tight with everyone here, but we'll make it work." The uncomfortable silence that followed told me I'd misunderstood something fundamental. "Avery," my father finally said, his tone business like, "your sister will need your room. It's the largest bedroom besides ours, and they'll need space for the nursery. You're 28 now, established in your career. Don't you think it's time you found your own place?" I looked around the table, waiting for someone to say this was a joke. My mother avoided my eyes. Melissa stared at her plate while Tyler suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. "You're kicking me out for Melissa again." The words slipped out before I could stop them, referring to how my teenage room had been converted to Melissa's study space when she was preparing for her LSATs years ago. "Don't be dramatic," my father said. "We're simply asking you to prioritize family needs. Melissa is starting a family. She needs support. And I've been paying rent for 5 years," I countered. "I'm family too," my mother intervened with her placating voice. "Of course you are, darling. But surely you understand a baby changes everything. We'll give you 3 months to find something suitable." 3 months, I echoed, incredulous. "In this housing market, with Boston rents, if that's not enough time," my father said, his voice hardening, "you can always move to the basement until you figure something out. The important thing is that Melissa gets settled before the baby comes." As the reality sank in, I looked at my sister, hoping to find some recognition of the injustice. Instead, she gave me a small, apologetic smile. "It's just temporary, Avery. Maybe a year or 2 at most. You're so good at landing on your feet." That's when I realized nothing had changed since childhood. In the Blackwell family hierarchy, my needs would always come second to Melissa's. 5 years of rent payments, of helping around the house, of playing the dutiful daughter. Despite my father's constant disapproval, none of it mattered when Melissa needed something. "Give up the room or move out," my father repeated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request but a command. I carefully set down my napkin, stood up from the table, and made a decision that would change the course of our family forever. "I'll be out in 3 months," I said quietly. "And I won't need to move into the basement." What none of them knew, what I'd been keeping secret for months, was that my playing on computers had recently resulted in my company being acquired by a major tech firm. As the head of digital strategy, I'd received a substantial payout in stock options that had made me at 28 wealthier than my parents would ever be. I'd been saving the news for the right moment, thinking my father might finally show some respect for my career choices. Now I realized I had a much better use for my newfound financial freedom, one that would make a statement none of them would ever forget. The next morning, I called my real estate agent, before even getting out of bed. "Rachel, it's Avery. Remember that property we looked at on Maple Street, the one directly across from my parents' house? I want to make an offer. Today." Rachel's surprise was audible. "The Victorian Avery that's listed at $1.2 million? I thought you were looking in the $400K range." "Plans change," I replied, a newfound determination in my voice. "And I can pay cash." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Rachel recovered her professional composure. "I'll drop the paperwork right away. This is unexpected for everyone," I said, already imagining the looks on my family's faces. What my family didn't know, what I'd carefully kept hidden, was that 3 years into my disappointing career in digital marketing, I'd helped develop a proprietary algorithm that revolutionized how companies targeted their advertising. 6 months ago, our startup had been acquired for $85 million, with key team members receiving substantial equity payouts. As head of digital strategy, I'd walked away with $3.4 million after taxes. I'd been living modestly, continuing to pay rent to my parents while quietly meeting with financial advisors and planning my future. Initially, I'd thought about surprising my family with the news at Christmas, maybe even offering to help Melissa and Tyler with a down payment on their own home as a show of goodwill. Now I had different plans. The Victorian across from my parents' house had been on the market for months. Built in 1892, it was a 3-story architectural masterpiece, with bay windows, intricate gingerbread trim, and a wraparound porch. At 3,800 square feet with 5 bedrooms and 3.5 bathrooms, it was far more house than I needed, but the symbolism was worth every penny. While I waited for Rachel to prepare the offer, I went about my day as usual. I attended my morning meetings, remotely approved some campaign materials, and even helped my mother unload groceries when she returned from shopping, all without hinting at the financial bombshell I was about to drop. "Your father didn't mean to be so harsh last night," Mom said as we put away the food. "He just worries about Melissa handling a newborn. You know how he gets." "I understand," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Family comes first." She squeezed my shoulder, relief evident in her eyes. "Exactly. I'm glad you're not upset. Maybe we can help you find a nice apartment close by. There's that new complex by the train station." I smiled. "Don't worry, Mom. I've already started looking at places." 3 days later, my offer was accepted. The sellers, an older couple downsizing to Florida, were delighted to find a cash buyer willing to close quickly. Rachel suggested waiting to do a proper inspection, but I waved away her concerns. I wanted this house, needed this house, regardless of what problems it might have. "This is highly unusual," my lawyer said when I insisted on an expedited closing. "Most home purchases take at least 30 days, often 45 or more." "Money talks," I replied. "Make it happen in 2 weeks, and there's a bonus in it for everyone involved." True to my word, exactly 14 days after my parents' ultimatum, I signed the final paperwork, making me the owner of the most expensive home on Maple Street. I paid extra for the previous owners to expedite their move and began secretly ordering furniture for delivery. Throughout this whirlwind process, I maintained my normal routine at home. I continued attending family dinners, nodding politely as Melissa and Tyler discussed their plans for my room, and even helped my mother measure for new nursery curtains. Not once did I let slip what I was doing, savoring the knowledge of the dramatic reveal to come. By the 1-month mark after the fateful dinner, I had a fully furnished home waiting for me across the street. I'd hired an interior designer who worked miracles in record time, creating a showplace that mixed modern luxury with the home's vintage character. The master bedroom suite, twice the size of my parents' entire upstairs, featured a custom king bed, a sitting area with a fireplace, and a bathroom with a soaking tub positioned perfectly beneath a stained glass window. I'd arranged for extensive landscaping as well, replacing the somewhat neglected front garden with a riot of colorful flowers and architectural shrubs that enhanced the home's Victorian beauty while ensuring unobstructed views between the two properties. The only room I furnished personally was the front parlor, which I converted into a home office. I positioned my desk directly in front of the bay window that faced my parents' house, installing sheer curtains that would allow them to see my silhouette without providing privacy-invading details. A petty touch, perhaps, but one that would serve as a daily reminder of their mistake. 2 months after the ultimatum, with 1 month to spare before my eviction date, I was ready to make my move. I'd arranged for a moving company to arrive conspicuously at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, a time when I knew my entire family would be home. Melissa and Tyler had taken to coming over for weekend breakfasts, part of their gradual transition into the house. The night before, I packed the few possessions I planned to take from my childhood, home clothes, personal mementos, and the artwork I'd created over the years. Everything else, furniture, books, electronics, I left behind. They were physical representations of a life I was leaving behind, and I had better versions waiting for me across the street. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since the dinner. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the Blackwell family would learn that their safety net had become the architect of their most public humiliation. The moving day dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself approved of my plan. I woke early, dressed in a casual but expensive outfit designer, jeans, a silk blouse, and the Louboutin heels I'd splurged on to celebrate the acquisition, and waited for the familiar sounds of my family gathering for breakfast downstairs. Once I heard the clatter of plates and the murmur of voices, I made my final preparations. I applied my makeup carefully, styled my hair, and took one last look around the room that had been both sanctuary and prison for the past 5 years. Then I picked up my phone and texted the moving company, "Ready when you are." The response came immediately, "On your street now, ETA 2 minutes. Perfect timing." I hefted my designer overnight bag onto my shoulder, took a deep breath, and descended the stairs with deliberate slowness, savoring each step of my exit. In the kitchen, my family was engaged in their usual Saturday morning ritual. Dad behind his newspaper, Mom flipping pancakes, Melissa and Tyler discussing baby names over coffee. None of them noticed me enter until I cleared my throat. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "Don't get up, I just wanted to let you know I'm moving out today." 4 heads swiveled in my direction, expressions ranging from surprise to confusion. "Today," my mother echoed. "But sweetheart, you have another month. We haven't even had a chance to help you find a place." "I found one on my own," I replied, just as the rumble of a large truck became audible outside. In fact, that would be my movers now. My father lowered his newspaper, frowning. "Movers. For your bedroom furniture, isn't that excessive?" "Oh, I'm not taking any furniture," I said with a wave of my hand. "Everything in that room can stay for Melissa's nursery. I've bought all new things." The confusion on their faces deepened, and I suppressed a smile as the doorbell rang. "I'll get that," I said brightly, turning on my heel before any of them could respond. At the door stood a team of 5 professional movers in matching uniforms, clipboards in hand. "Miss Blackwell," the leader asked. "We're ready when you are. The truck is positioned as you requested." "Perfect," I replied. "I just have these few bags. The rest of my belongings are already at the new house." New house. My mother's voice came from behind me, where my entire family had gathered, curiosity overcoming their usual Saturday morning inertia. I turned to face them, allowing myself a moment to enjoy their confused expressions. "Yes, I've purchased a house. Would you like to see it?" Without waiting for an answer, I handed my bags to the movers and stepped onto the front porch. The moving truck was indeed positioned, strategically parked in a way that framed but didn't block the view of the magnificent Victorian directly across the street, where another team of workers was busy arranging furniture on the front porch and tending to the newly installed landscape lighting. "It's right there," I said, pointing across the street. "I closed on it last month." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face drained of color while my mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Melissa gripped Tyler's arm so tightly he winced. That's the Hendersons' old place," my father finally managed. "The one listed for over $1 million. 1.2 million, actually," I corrected him. "Though I negotiated them down to 1.1. Cash offers have that advantage." "Cash," he spluttered. "Where would you get from playing on computers all day?" I interrupted smoothly. "My company was acquired 6 months ago. I received a substantial payout as head of digital strategy, the career you've been dismissing for years." My mother stepped forward, her expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Why didn't you tell us, Avery? This is wonderful news." "Is it?" I asked, maintaining my composure. "I was going to share it at Christmas, maybe even offer to help Melissa and Tyler buy their own place." I looked directly at my sister, whose face had paled considerably. Instead, I found a better investment opportunity right across the street. The implications were beginning to dawn on them now. My father's face reddened while my mother looked increasingly distressed. "You bought that house to spite us?" my father asked incredulously. "I bought that house because I could," I corrected him. "The location is just a bonus. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have movers to direct and a new home to settle into." As I descended the steps, Melissa broke away from the group and hurried after me. "Avery, wait! This is insane! We can talk about this." I turned to face her, keeping my voice level despite the emotions churning inside me. There's nothing to talk about, Melissa. You needed my room, and now you have it. I needed my own place, and now I have it. Everyone wins. But across the street, she hissed. Do you know how awkward this will be? About as awkward as being told to give up the room or move out after 5 years of paying rent, I replied. Don't worry, I won't interfere with your perfect little family. In fact, I gestured to one of the movers who was carrying an oversized envelope. I have something for you. The mover handed me the envelope, which I passed to Melissa. Consider it an early baby shower gift. Confused, she opened it and pulled out a document. Her eyes widened as she read. This is the deed to a 2-bedroom condo in Brookline, I confirmed. Fully paid for and in your name. It's in a great school district, has a nursery-ready 2nd bedroom, and is walking distance to the park. I thought you might prefer your own space to raise your child rather than moving back in with mom and dad. Melissa stared at me in shock, the document trembling in her hands. I don't understand. It's simple, I said. Despite how this family has treated me, I genuinely want you and your baby to thrive. That condo offers you independence without financial strain. Take it or leave it, it's already in your name regardless. Tyler had joined us now, his expression a mixture of disbelief and calculation as Melissa showed him the deed. This is incredibly generous, he said cautiously. It's not generosity, I corrected him. It's investment in my niece or nephew's future, something this family taught me the importance of in their way. By now, my parents had recovered enough to approach my father's face thunderous. What is the meaning of this spectacle? The entire neighborhood is watching. They certainly are, I agreed calmly. Just as they'll be watching every day when I have my morning coffee on the front porch, or work in my street-facing office, or host dinner parties in my dining room, with its excellent view of your living room. Visibility works both ways, Dad. My mother was openly crying now. Avery, please. We can work this out as a family. We are working it out, I replied. I'm giving Melissa and Tyler a home of their own, which solves everyone's problems. They don't have to move in with you, I don't have to give up my room, and you don't have to choose between your daughters anymore. I checked my watch, a deliberate theatrical gesture. Now, I really must go. The interior designer is waiting for my final approval on some details. As I walked away, leaving my family stunned on the sidewalk, a neighbor pushing a stroller paused to admire the activity around the Victorian. Moving into the Henderson place, she asked me brightly. Yes, I replied, with a genuine smile. Just across from my parents. We're keeping it in the neighborhood. How wonderful, she exclaimed. Family close by, but still your own space, that's the perfect arrangement. I laughed loud enough for my family to hear. Isn't it just? I couldn't imagine a better situation. As I crossed the street toward my new home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear my parents arguing in hushed, furious tones, while Melissa appeared to be crying as Tyler examined the condo documents more closely. The moving team leader met me at the gate of my new property. Everything going according to plan, miss? Blackwell, I looked back at the tableau. I'd created my family in disarray on the sidewalk, neighbors slowing their cars to watch the drama unfold, and my magnificent new home standing as testament to my success. Perfectly, I replied. Absolutely perfectly. The first week in my new house was a study in contrasts. The serene luxury inside versus the emotional chaos visible through my front windows. My family's reaction unfolded in phases like a predictable yet still fascinating psychological experiment. Phase 1 was denial. For 3 days, my parents' curtains remained drawn, their cars stayed in the garage, and no one acknowledged my existence, despite the fact that I deliberately established a routine of morning coffee on my front porch, positioned to be clearly visible from their kitchen window. Melissa and Tyler disappeared entirely, presumably to explore their unexpected gift of a condo. Phase 2 began on day 4, with my mother's tentative approach. I was pruning the rose bushes I'd had installed along the front fence when she appeared at my gate, clutching a homemade pie like a peace offering. "The house looks lovely," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "I thought you might like some apple pie while you settle in." I invited her in, watching her eyes widen as she took in the soaring ceilings, the restored original woodwork, and the obviously expensive furnishings. I gave her the abbreviated tour, excluding the master suite, and my office before serving tea in the sunroom that offered a strategic view of the back of their property. "Why didn't you tell us about your success, Avery?" she finally asked, setting down her teacup. "We would have celebrated with you." "Would you?" I asked mildly. "Or would Dad have found a way to diminish it like he has with everything else I've accomplished? Would Melissa have immediately needed something that overshadowed my news?" My mother flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I countered. "When I got into art school with a scholarship, Dad called it a waste of potential. When I landed my first marketing job, he said I was settling. When I was promoted to head of strategy, he asked when I'd find a real career. Why would this be any different?" She had no answer for that, and we finished our tea in silence. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Your sister is very grateful for the condo. Tyler's already painting the nursery." I'm glad, I said sincerely. That was the point. "Then why this?" She gestured around, encompassing the house and its deliberate positioning. "If you wanted to help, why the public humiliation?" I considered my answer carefully. "Because some lessons need to be learned dramatically to be remembered. Dad needed to understand that his dismissal of my choices had consequences. You needed to recognize that your compliance with his favoritism hurt one child without truly helping the other. And Melissa needed to see that constantly being given priority doesn't prepare you for the real world." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said softly. "That's what makes it worse. You didn't even realize you were doing it." Phase 3 began that weekend with my father's inevitable confrontation. Unlike my mother's quiet approach, he came charging up my walkway on Saturday morning, his face set in the expression I recognized from countless childhood scoldings. I met him at the door before he could ring the bell. "Good morning, Dad. Would you like to come in?" His anger seemed to falter briefly at my calm greeting, but he recovered quickly. "This has gone far enough, Avery. This display is childish and unnecessary." "Is it?" I leaned against the doorframe, making no move to let him enter. "I think it's perfectly adult to purchase property as an investment." "Isn't that what you've always advised? Real estate holds its value, I believe you said." "Don't play games," he snapped. "You know exactly what you're doing, parading your sudden wealth in front of the entire neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "As opposed to you parading your preference for Melissa in front of me my entire life. At least I'm honest about my intentions." That struck home. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Your mother is upset," he said, changing tactics. "She's barely slept all week." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied. Perhaps she should have considered the consequences before agreeing to kick out her paying tenant to make room for the golden child. Again, my father's face reddened. "We did not kick you out. We asked you to make room for a baby, your own niece or nephew. By moving to the basement if I couldn't find housing in one of the most expensive markets in the country," I reminded him. "Despite 5 years of reliable rent payments that helped fund your retirement. We gave you a home when you couldn't afford one," he countered. "No, Dad. You rented me a room in my childhood home and made sure I never forgot it was conditional on your approval." I straightened up, no longer leaning casually. "Now I have my own home, one you can see every day but can never control. Fitting, isn't it? He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. A realization, perhaps, that the power dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. "Your sister says you bought her a condo," he finally said. "I did. A very nice one in a neighborhood she could never afford on their salaries. Unlike you, I don't believe in making family members compete for basic needs." That landed like a physical blow. My father actually took a step back. "Is that what you think we did?" "It's what you did," I confirmed. "And now you're facing the consequences of creating a competition between your daughters. One of us won, Dad, just not the one you expected." I watched the emotions war on his face: anger, pride, confusion, and finally a grudging respect. "You could have told us about the acquisition," he said, his tone less confrontational. "We're your family." "Yes," I agreed. "And families should support each other without conditions. When you're ready to do that, my door is open. Until then, enjoy the view from across the street." I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving him standing on my porch. Through the stained glass panels, I watched him stare at the door for several long moments before turning and walking slowly back to his house, shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. The final phase began the following week when Melissa arrived alone, her pregnancy now visibly showing beneath her loose dress. "Unlike our parents," she texted before coming over. "The condo is amazing," she said as I showed her into the living room. "I can't believe you did that for us." "Despite everything, you're still my sister," I replied. "And that baby is innocent in all this." She ran her hand over the velvet sofa eyes, taking in the crystal chandelier and marble fireplace. "This place is incredible. You really must be loaded." I laughed at her characteristic bluntness. "I did well. Better than anyone in our family expected, apparently." "Including me," she admitted, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I never really thought about how Dad treated you differently. It was just normal for you," I pointed out. "Yeah," she sighed, resting a hand on her growing belly. "I get it now, though. Watching Mom and Dad lose their minds this week over you buying this house, it's like suddenly seeing our whole childhood from the outside. They're not used to you having any power." I was surprised by her insight. "No, they're not." "Is that why you did it? To show them you have power now?" I considered this as I poured us both sparkling water. "Partly, but it was also about making a point that can't be ignored or minimized. Dad can't dismiss this as playing on computers when the result is literally staring him in the face every day." Melissa nodded slowly. "It's working. He's been having what Mom calls perspective conversations with his friend Jack. I think that's code for therapy." That was unexpected. Our father had always ridiculed therapy as paying strangers to tell you what you want to hear. "Good for him," I said, genuinely pleased. "It's about time." "They're also talking about selling the house," Melissa added, watching for my reaction. "Mom says she can't bear looking out the window and being reminded of their mistake. Dad says it's about downsizing now that neither of us needs to live there." I felt a momentary pang at the thought of my childhood home being sold quickly, replaced by satisfaction. That's their choice. "Where will they go?" "They're looking at condos near the one you bought us," she said with a wry smile. Apparently being near their grandchild is suddenly the priority, not having us under their roof. We both laughed at the irony, the tension between us, easing for perhaps the first time since childhood. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her voice serious. "Not just for the condo, but for forcing all of us to see the truth. I've spent my whole life accepting advantages I didn't earn, never questioning why things always seem to work out for me, but not for you. That's on me too, not just Mom and Dad." Her admission touched me more deeply than I expected. "We were both just playing the roles we were assigned," I said. "You as the perfect daughter, me as the disappointment." "Well, look who's disappointing now," she joked, gesturing at her belly. pregnant before establishing my career, moving into a place bought by my little sister. Dad's having conniptions trying to spin this to the neighbors. Let him spin, I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. Sometimes public humiliation is the best teacher. After Melissa left, I stood at my front window watching the lights come on in my parents' house as evening fell. Their familiar silhouettes moved behind the curtains, going about their routine, unaware of my observation. For the first time since the fateful dinner, I felt not anger but a strange peace. The grand gesture had served its purpose. Now it was time to see what would grow in the newly disrupted soil of our family dynamics. I touched my phone in my pocket, thinking about all of you watching this story unfold. Life doesn't always give us neat, satisfying conclusions to family drama. Sometimes we have to engineer them ourselves. But even the most dramatic gesture is just the beginning of a new chapter, not the end of the story. Would my parents truly change? Would Melissa continue her journey towards self-awareness? Would I find happiness in this beautiful house, purchased partly out of spite? The answers would come with time. For now, I had made my point in a way that couldn't be ignored or diminished, a family legacy of its own kind. If you're dealing with family who can't see your worth, remember, sometimes the best response isn't arguing or explaining yourself again. Sometimes it's succeeding so spectacularly they can't possibly miss the view. Drop a like if you're enjoying this journey with me, and subscribe to see how this family saga continues to evolve. The drama is just getting started. 1 month into my new living arrangement, the neighborhood had largely adjusted to the unusual situation. The successful daughter living in luxury directly across from her middle-class parents. The initial flurry of gossip had settled into occasional curious glances, though I noticed delivery people often did double takes when dropping packages at both addresses in the same trip. My parents, however, remained in emotional turmoil. Their attempts at reconciliation came in waves, each with its own distinct approach and underlying motivation. My mother tried the guilt approach first. She began appearing on my doorstep with increasing frequency, always bearing some homemade dish or family memento you might want for your new home. Her visits always included subtle references to how difficult things had become. Your father barely sleeps, she mentioned while arranging cookies on a plate in my kitchen. He keeps the blinds closed on the street side now. Says the light from your house bothers him, but I think it's more than that. I didn't take the bait. These cookies are delicious, Mom. New recipe. She tried again the following week, bringing photo albums from my childhood. I found these while packing. We're still considering selling, you know. 30 years in one house, so many memories. You should digitize these. I suggested turning pages of my awkward school photos and dance recitals. I can recommend a service that does excellent work. Her frustration became increasingly evident when her emotional appeals failed to elicit the remorse she sought. During what became known as the casserole incident, she finally broke. "Why are you being so cold?" she demanded, slamming down a dish of tuna noodle casserole hard enough to crack my granite countertop. "We made a mistake, Avery. We've admitted it. What more do you want from us?" I looked at her calmly, recognizing this as a pivotal moment. I want acknowledgement not just of the ultimatum mistake, but of the lifetime pattern it represented. I want recognition that I was treated as less valuable than Melissa throughout my childhood and into adulthood. And I want actual change, not just regret that your actions had unexpected consequences. My mother stared at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I never meant to make you feel less valuable." "I know," I said gently. "That's why we're having this conversation, instead of me cutting contact completely. Intent matters, but so do impacts." She left subdued that day, the shattered pieces of her casserole dish wrapped in newspaper, a fitting metaphor for our family's current state. My father's approach to reconciliation was more strategic, and in many ways more revealing of his character. After his initial confrontation failed, he attempted to reassert control through more familiar channels, money, and social standing. First came the financial advisor, who called requesting a meeting at your father's recommendation to discuss optimizing my windfall. I politely declined, informing him I already had a team managing my investments. Next came the invitations to join the country club where my father had been a member for decades. Your application would sail through with my sponsorship, he mentioned during an awkward encounter at the local coffee shop. The networking opportunities would be valuable for someone in your position. My position is quite comfortable without additional networking, I replied, paying for both our coffees before he could reach for his wallet, a small power move that didn't go unnoticed. His final attempt was the most transparent. He arranged for his friend, a real estate developer, to approach me with an incredible opportunity to sell my house at a significant profit to make way for luxury condominiums. Your father mentioned you might be interested in a quick turnover, the developer said, visibly uncomfortable under my steady gaze. The Victorian is charming, but requires constant maintenance. We could offer 20% above market. I smiled. Please tell my father that unlike him, I don't see homes as primarily financial investments. My house isn't for sale at any price, but especially not as part of his schemes. The developer left hastily, and that evening I noticed my father standing in his driveway staring at my house with an unreadable expression. I raised my wine glass in a small salute from my porch. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded once before retreating inside. The most genuine reconciliation attempt came from an unexpected source. Tyler, my brother-in-law, appeared at my door one Saturday morning, looking sheepish but determined. Melissa doesn't know I'm here, he admitted as I invited him in. She'd probably tell me to mind my own business, but I think someone needs to help bridge this gap before the baby comes. I offered him coffee, curious about this intervention from the family member I knew least well. I grew up in a fractured family, he explained, accepting the mug gratefully. Parents divorced when I was 8, spent the rest of my childhood as a battlefield between them. I don't want that for our kid. I don't either, I assured him. My issue is with my parents' treatment of me, not with your child. I know that, he said. And you've been incredibly generous with the condo. But the tension between you and your parents affects Melissa, which affects the baby. And honestly, it's going to be weird explaining to a toddler why Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Avery live across from each other but don't speak. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation when framed that way. Fair point. What are you suggesting? Family dinner, he said simply. Neutral territory, not their house, not your house. Just a restaurant, good food, and an agreement to start fresh. With conditions I stipulated after consideration. Real acknowledgement of the past, no sweeping things under the rug. Tyler nodded. I'll make it happen. True to his word, he arranged a private dining room at an upscale restaurant the following weekend. My parents arrived visibly nervous, my mother clutching her purse like a shield, my father tugging at his collar repeatedly, a tell from childhood that signaled his discomfort. Melissa, now prominently pregnant, offered me a tentative smile as we took our seats. Tyler, playing mediator, had thoughtfully arranged the seating to avoid direct face-offs. The first 20 minutes were excruciating, stilted conversation about the weather, the restaurant's decor, careful avoidance of anything substantive. Finally, as our entree arrived, Tyler cleared his throat. I think we all know why we're here, he said firmly. This family has some healing to do before our child arrives, and that starts with honesty. My father began a practice speech about family unity and moving forward, but Tyler respectfully cut him off. Richard, with all due respect, that's not honesty. That's a corporate merger statement. He turned to me. Avery has some things that need to be acknowledged. I think we should listen. In the startled silence that followed, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. Having an advocate in this setting was a new experience. Thank you, Tyler, I said, gathering my thoughts. What I need acknowledged is simple but difficult. Throughout my life, there has been a pattern of my needs being secondary to Melissa's. The ultimatum about my room was just the final, clearest example. I need you both. I looked at my parents to understand that wasn't just about a bedroom. It was about my place in this family. My mother began to protest, but my father placed his hand over hers, stopping her. Let her finish, he said quietly. Encouraged by this small sign of change, I continued. I don't need apologies for individual incidents. I need recognition of the pattern and a commitment to actual change going forward. I need to know that if I remain in this family, I will be valued equally, not as the successful daughter, not as the disappointing daughter, just as your daughter. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, to everyone's surprise, my father's eyes filled with tears, something I had seen perhaps twice in my life. I failed you, he said simply. I had such rigid ideas about success and the right path that I couldn't see your path was valid too. By the time you started succeeding by any measure, the pattern was so established I couldn't break it. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just the chance to do better. My mother reached for my hand across the table. We never meant to make you feel less important, she said, echoing her words from our earlier conversation. We thought we were pushing you toward what would make you happy and secure. We were wrong, and not just about the room. I felt something tight and painful in my chest begin to loosen. That's all I wanted to hear, I said softly. Acknowledgement that it wasn't in my head. It definitely wasn't, Melissa interjected. I benefited from it my whole life without questioning it. That's on me too. The conversation that followed was raw, difficult, and occasionally tearful, but it felt like excavating an infected wound, painful but necessary for healing. We talked about childhood incidents I'd held on to for decades, patterns none of them had recognized, but all could now see in retrospect. By dessert, we had established what Tyler called Family 2, zero ground rules, which included regular honest check-ins, a ban on comparative language between Melissa and me, and a commitment to therapy individual for my father couples for my parents and family sessions monthly. As we prepared to leave, my father asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. Will you still live across the street from us? It feels like a daily reminder of our failure. I considered this carefully. The house was partly purchased out of spite, I admitted. But it's also a beautiful home that I've come to love. I'm staying, but perhaps we can reframe what it represents. Instead of a monument to past hurts, it could be a symbol of our family's resilience, our ability to face hard truths, and still choose connection. My mother smiled through her tears. I'd like that interpretation much better. Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to go our separate ways, Melissa pulled me aside. The baby kicked for the first time yesterday, she said. I wanted you to feel it. She placed my hand on her rounded belly, and after a moment I felt the flutter of movement, my niece or nephew making their presence known. Active already, I said, genuinely moved. Like their aunt, Melissa replied, strong-willed and refuses to be ignored. We shared a laugh that felt like the beginning of a new relationship, sisters by birth, but perhaps finally friends by choice. The transition from estrangement to reconciliation wasn't smooth or instantaneous. Like any significant relationship change, it progressed in fits and starts with moments of genuine connection, interspersed with old patterns reasserting themselves, requiring vigilance and course correction. True to their word, my parents began therapy. My father, initially resistant despite his agreement, found himself unexpectedly transformed by the process. 6 weeks after our restaurant summit, he called me directly, something he rarely did, preferring to communicate through my mother. My therapist suggested something he said without preamble. When I answered, "Would you be willing to come to my office one day? I'd like to show you something." Curious, I agreed, and the following afternoon found myself entering the investment firm where he'd worked for 30 years. His assistant greeted me with surprise. "You're Richard's younger daughter, I didn't realize." She trailed off, studying my face. "He usually only mentions Melissa." "That's part of what I want to address," my father said, appearing in the doorway of his corner office. "Come in, Avery." Inside, he directed me to a credenza behind his desk that I'd seen many times during childhood visits. Previously, it had displayed numerous photos of Melissa graduation wedding professional headshots with just one small photo of me from high school. Now, I was shocked to see the display completely transformed. Alongside Melissa's photos were new, professionally framed photos of me, my college graduation, a candid shot from my company's acquisition announcement that had appeared in the business press, and several family photos where I was centered rather than peripheral. My therapist pointed out that our physical spaces reflect our priorities, my father explained, watching my reaction carefully. She asked me to count how many photos I had of each daughter in my spaces. The disparity was illuminating. "This is nice, Dad," I said, genuinely touched by the effort, if skeptical of its depth. "It's not just for show," he insisted, as if reading my thoughts. "It's a daily reminder to myself about my blind spots. Every time I look at these, I remember our conversation. I remember what I nearly lost through my stubbornness." He hesitated, then added, "I've also reached out to several promising digital startups for potential investment. I'd appreciate your insights given your expertise in the field, if you're willing." The request for my professional opinion, an acknowledgement of my expertise in a field he'd previously dismissed, felt more meaningful than the photo display. "I'd be happy to review them," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. My mother's evolution took a different path. She threw herself into preparations for both her first grandchild and the potential sale of their house, using these practical matters as bridges to rebuild our relationship. "What do you think of this paint color for the nursery?" became her new greeting, waving paint chips at me whenever we met. Or, "The realtor thinks we should stage the living room differently. Would you mind giving a second opinion?" These seemingly mundane questions served a deeper purpose, I realized. They were her way of saying, "I value your judgment. Your opinion matters to me. You have taste and insight I respect." One rainy afternoon, as we sorted through decades of family possessions in preparation for my parents' downsizing, she paused over a box of my childhood art projects. "I saved everything you ever made," she said softly, lifting out a misshapen clay bowl from elementary school. "Every drawing, every school essay, every art project. Melissa's too, of course, but yours. Yours were special to me. You created in a way she never did." Then why I began but couldn't finish. "Why did I let your father's favoritism continue unchecked?" she finished for me. "Because I was a coward, Avery. I thought if I pushed back too hard, the whole family would fracture. I convinced myself that you were strong enough to handle it, that you didn't need the extra attention he gave Melissa." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "I was wrong. Every child needs to feel equally valued. I failed you by trying to balance him instead of challenging him. I won't make that mistake with my grandchild, or with you, ever again." I hugged her, then both of us crying over the clay bowl, this tangible evidence of love that had always existed, but had been overshadowed by louder messages of conditional approval. Meanwhile, Melissa and Tyler prepared for parenthood in their new condo, gradually transforming from reluctant beneficiaries of my generosity to genuine partners in the family's healing process. "We're thinking of naming the baby after you if it's a girl," Melissa told me over lunch in her newly decorated dining room. "Not the first name that's already decided, but maybe a middle name, if you're comfortable with that." "I'd be honored," I said, surprised by the gesture. "But why?" She rubbed her rounded belly thoughtfully. "Because you changed everything, Avery. You stood up when no one else would. You forced us all to see the truth even when it was painful. That's the kind of courage I want to pass down to this little person." The day they officially moved into the condo coincided with my parents accepting an offer on their house. As the moving trucks arrived at both properties, I found myself standing on my front porch, watching the simultaneous dismantling and rebuilding of my family's physical presence in the neighborhood. My father approached, looking both tired and relieved as the movers carried out the living room furniture I'd grown up with. "We found a place," he said, stopping at my gate. "A townhouse near Melissa's condo. 2 bedrooms plus a den I'm converting to a home office. Less than half the size of this place. Sounds perfect for this next chapter," I replied. He nodded, looking up at my house, the house that had been purchased as a statement of defiance but had somehow become a catalyst for change. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I hated this house when you first bought it. Saw it as a monument to my failure, a daily reminder of my mistakes." He paused. "Now I'm grateful for it. Without this grand gesture, we might have continued in our patterns for years, maybe forever." That was the point, I admitted. Subtlety hadn't worked for 28 years. He laughed, a genuine sound I'd heard too rarely in our relationship. Subtlety was never going to work on me. I needed the emotional equivalent of a brick to the head. He gestured toward the Victorian. This was certainly that. As the final boxes were loaded onto their moving truck, my parents stood on what had been their driveway for 3 decades, looking disoriented despite their choice to sell. Without overthinking, I walked across the street and made an offer. "Would you like to have dinner at my place tonight? It seems wrong to end this chapter with takeout in an empty house." That evening, we gathered around my dining table, my parents Melissa and Tyler and me, eating lasagna and drinking wine sparkling cider from Melissa in what had once been the epicenter of our family conflict. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, punctuated by laughter and absent the underlying tension that had previously characterized our gatherings. As I looked around the table, I realized we had created something new from the wreckage of old patterns. Not perfect, not without occasional relapses into familiar dynamics, but fundamentally changed. The $1.2 million house across the street had served its purpose, not as permanent revenge, but as the dramatic gesture needed to break patterns too entrenched to dismantle gently. 2 months later, my parents were settled in their townhouse. Their former home sold to a young family with 3 small children, and Melissa was weeks away from her due date. The neighborhood had largely forgotten the drama of the Blackwell family's strange real estate arrangements, and I had established a comfortable routine in my beautiful Victorian. On a crisp fall evening, as I sat on my porch with a glass of wine enjoying the sunset, my phone rang with Melissa's special ringtone. "It's happening," she said without preamble, her voice a mixture of panic and excitement. "My water broke. We're heading to the hospital now." "I'll meet you there," I replied, already moving inside to grab my keys. "Have you called Mom and Dad? Tyler's calling them now. Can you bring the hospital bag? We forgot. It's just inside our front door." "Of course." "Breathe, Melissa. Everything's going to be fine." As I drove to their condo to retrieve the forgotten bag, then onto the hospital, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From a painful ultimatum at a family dinner to the imminent birth of a new generation, our family had traversed territory that had seemed impassable just months before. In the hospital waiting room, I found my parents already there, my mother pacing nervously while my father pretended to read a magazine. They looked up when I entered, relief evident on their faces. "You made it," my mother said, embracing me. "Now we're all here." "All here," I echoed, realizing the simple truth in those words. Despite everything, we had found our way back to each other, changed but intact, ready to welcome the newest Blackwell not as competing factions but as a united family. Hours later, when Tyler emerged from the delivery room with tears of joy streaming down his face, we stood together to receive the news. "It's a girl," he announced. 7 pounds 4 ounces. Melissa is doing great. When we were finally allowed in to see them, Melissa looked exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle with a shock of dark hair. "Everyone," she said, "softly meet Olivia Avery Mitchell." As I held my niece for the first time, feeling the weight of her small body and the tremendous responsibility of being her namesake, I caught my father's eye across the hospital bed. He nodded once, a gesture that contained volumes, acknowledgement of the past, commitment to a different future, and perhaps most importantly, recognition of my equal place in this family's story. Outside the hospital window, the city lights twinkled in the early evening darkness. Somewhere across town stood a beautiful Victorian house, purchased in anger but transformed by time and effort into something else entirely. Not a monument to revenge, but a symbol of what can be rebuilt when old structures are dismantled. Make way for truth. 6 months after Olivia's birth, my family gathered in the backyard of my Victorian for a Sunday barbecue. My father manned the grill with unexpected enthusiasm for a man who had rarely cooked during my childhood. My mother and Melissa sat beneath the shade of an oak tree, taking turns bouncing Olivia on their laps. Tyler was setting up a badminton net with more concentration than the task required. I watched them from my kitchen window as I prepared a salad, struck by how ordinary and yet extraordinary the scene appeared. This peaceful family gathering would have seemed impossible a year ago, when hurt and resentment defined our relationships. "Need any help?" My father appeared at the door, spatula in hand. "Just finishing up," I replied. "Everything okay at the grill?" "Perfect. Steaks need a few minutes to rest anyway." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to tell you something before everyone else." I set down my knife, giving him my full attention. "What is it?" "I'm retiring next month," he said, a mixture of apprehension and excitement in his voice. 35 years at the firm is enough. I want time to know my granddaughter, to travel with your mother, maybe even to learn some new skills." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" He smiled somewhat sheepishly. "Actually, I've been looking into digital marketing courses. Nothing professional, just enough to understand what my daughter does for a living." The simple acknowledgement of my career, something he had dismissed for years, meant more than he could know. "I could teach you a few things," I offered, "if you'd be interested." "I was hoping you'd say that." He glanced through the window at the family gathered outside. "It's strange how things work out, isn't it? A year ago, I thought we'd lost you. Now, here we are." "Here we are," I agreed. "It wasn't easy, though." "No," he acknowledged. "It took a $1.2 million wake-up call and a lot of therapy, but worth every penny and painful conversation." He paused, then asked, "Do you ever regret buying this place?" Now that things are different, I considered the question seriously. Never. Even without the family drama, it's a beautiful house, and the story of how I got it will make a fantastic dinner party anecdote for years to come. He laughed and picked up the salad bowl to carry it outside. "Come on. Your mother's making eyes at me to hurry up with the food." As we joined the others, Olivia spotted me and stretched out her arms, her face lighting up with recognition. I set down my contribution to the meal and took her from Melissa, breathing in the baby scent of her hair. "There's my favorite niece," I cooed, though she was my only niece. "She's been waiting for her aunt," Avery Melissa said. "Watch this. She learned something new." She dangled the baby's favorite toy just out of reach, and Olivia rolled herself over with determination, grabbing it triumphantly. "She's persistent," I observed proudly. "Gets that from our side of the family." We shared a knowing look, acknowledging the stubborn streak that had caused so much conflict, but had ultimately saved us all. As the afternoon unfolded into evening, with good food and better conversation, I realized we had come full circle. The family dinner that had begun this journey had fractured us. This one was bringing us back together stronger at the broken places. When the others had gone home and I stood alone on my porch watching the lights come on in houses up and down the street, I felt a deep contentment. The $1.2 million revenge house had served its purpose, not as permanent punishment, but as the catalyst for necessary change. Sometimes I mused the grandest gestures aren't about lasting vengeance, but about creating such a profound disruption that new growth becomes possible. Like a forest fire clearing dead underbrush, the dramatic purchase had burned away pretense and denial, making room for honesty and healing. I took one last look at the quiet street before heading inside, grateful for the journey that had brought me here to this house, to this moment, to this new understanding of family. Not perfect, still learning, but finally built on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than rigid hierarchy. And that I decided was worth far more than $1.2 million. Hey everyone, what a journey this has been, right? I'd love to know if you've ever experienced family karma coming full circle in your own life. Have you had to make a dramatic stand to be valued by your family? Drop your stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this family revenge tale with its unexpected path to healing, please hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories with surprising twists, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself can lead to positive change. Thank you for coming along on this emotional roller coaster with me. I'll be back next week with another story that proves sometimes the best revenge is living well. Until then, remember that family dynamics can change when we're brave enough to challenge them.